To begin with, what kind of educational system did we have in the early days of Iowa City? Iowa City was founded in 1839 out of bare earth to be the new capital of the Iowa Territory, to be closer to the center of the territory, moving to here from Burlington. Iowa City was unincorporated until 1853, and until that time, and for 5 years after that, there was no evidence that we had public schools in our town. Now, I'm only going to discuss the schools of Iowa City. I will not include the other schools of the Iowa City Community School District. No Coralville, no North Liberty, and no Hills. First, we get to the pre-1850 schools. According to Irving Weber, Jesse Berry began the first private school in 1840, quote, for the children of ambitious parents, end quote. The school was on College Street, just west of Clinton Street. And later in 1840, Isaiah Choate, it's the same name as the art gallery downtown, I don't know the pronunciation, started his private school on Market Street. Other private schools began in 1841, including ones by a Mrs. Schulein, Dr. William Reynolds, W.B.N.T. Snyder, and Charles F. Hardy. In 1842, the Iowa City Mechanics, or that is, mechanics in Iowa City, donated their skills and materials to build what became known as the Mechanics Academy. And the school eventually failed, but later served as the first Mercy Hospital building. The University of Iowa also had its beginning in the Mechanics Academy. The cornerstone from the academy has been preserved in the interior, of all places, the medical laboratory building in the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics complex. Here it is. Rather interesting that it's there. Great that it's preserved. And to familiarize yourself with that, here is the east wall of the medical laboratories building. The med labs were built just prior to the main university hospital. Bob Hibbs related that private schools failed because they lacked access to tax dollars and facilities, with most meeting in church basements or other meeting halls, and there were no standards in place. In 1855, 2 years after Iowa City was incorporated, voters approved a school bond issue to build some facilities. 3 wards of about equal size were created by the council in 1856, and it authorized a school building to be constructed in each ward. These buildings were completed in 1858. They were to last a long time, about 60 years, in fact. The first ward school, that is the school in the first ward, was built on the site of the former Saban Elementary School. Here it is. The first second ward school because there were 2. The first one was built on the site of the new Psychology Brain Sciences building right across from the Historical Society to the west. A second ward school was built near present-day Mercy Hospital. The third ward school, it was built on the site of today's North Market Park, adjacent to Mann Elementary School and the Prusso School of Music building. Later, 2 more wards were created in Iowa City. The 4th ward school was built on the southwest quadrant of the Dodge Street, Court Street intersection, but no pictures of it could be found. And the 5th ward had no school and sent its students to the 4th ward school. Here's a map of Iowa City from 1875. We can see the lettering overlaid for the wards on the map. The first ward on the bottom left, then up to the second, over to the third, bottom right, 4th ward. Here's the same map with the locations of the ward schools. We can see an even distribution of the schools throughout town. Note also that the northern and southernmost schools are labeled the Shimmick and Kirkwood schools respectively. I will discuss them next. Now, there were a couple of schools in the 1890s, and those were the ones. In early 1891, 2 new school buildings were proposed to the voters of Iowa City. Apparently, one of them was completed in October of 1891, later referred to as the Schoolhouse on the Hill. That would be the North School. And in about October of 1891, the North School opened. It also became known as the Shimmick School. It sits on North Dodge Street, just south of its confluence with Governor Street. You might recognize that building from it does exist today. Here it is today, a residential property, a little bit hidden unless you look off to the left as you come down Dodge Street. Professor Shimmick is quoted as saying, quote, "I have been embarrassed frequently by the fact that the school bears my name. The name was given to the school without my knowledge or consent because I worked for and was a member of the school board when the building was erected in 1892. I am going to ask the board to change the name back to the Old North School," end quote. He was quite a humble man. Shimmick School was closed in 1936, after which its pupils attended Horace Mann School. Many of you will recognize this building. This was the Kirkwood School at 650 Kirkwood Avenue, and it opened in about 1892. I say about because I've searched the newspapers, and the ones that I have available have not given me an article that I could locate. But it stands today as a private residence. It was also known as the South School. It's at the northwest corner of Dodge Street and Kirkwood Avenue. When it closed in 1954, it was the oldest school still operated by what was called the Independent School District of Iowa City. Its pupils then went to either the Henry Saban School or to the new Mark Twain School. This school building later housed the public school system's Building and Grounds Department. I know we have Barb in the audience, a former school teacher in the public elementary schools here, and perhaps more. I know we have another one too, I think, David Van Dusseldorp. So great. It might bring back memories to some of you folks. Samuel Kirkwood's name is known to everyone in Iowa City, at least the last name. He was born in Maryland in 1813, made his way to Iowa in 1855, and was elected to the Iowa Senate the following year. He was also our Civil War governor and was governor again in the 1870s. Here's a list of entities named for Kirkwood, at least the ones that I have found. And a note at the bottom says that Kirkwood and Norman Borlaug have sculptured likenesses under the rotunda in the U.S. Capitol building. The next move in the building of schools was in the 1910s. The University of Iowa Elementary School. We hear of U-High, speak of U-High. We never hear U-Low or U-Elementary, maybe we do, but anyway, the University of Iowa Elementary School opened in September of 1915, using, quote, 3 especially qualified elementary school teachers, end quote. When it began, the school was supervised by Dr. Ernest Horn, using 3 rooms in Schaefer Hall, shown here. We know Dr. Horn's name for the Horn Elementary School on the west side. In 1917, the University Elementary School was moved to what we called Old Dental, which was built in 1895. The University High School U-High was also housed in Old Dental in 1917, and that was the year dentistry moved to a new building 1 block north. In 1925, the university schools moved to North Hall, and enrollment grew steadily during the 1930s. The university schools remained essentially a place for experimentation and new ideas. Many innovative teaching methods, testing methods, and textbooks were developed at the schools. The faculty consisted of University of Iowa graduate students. Here's a headline in the July 25th, 1916 Iowa City Daily Citizen. That was before we had the Press Citizen in, I think, 1922. And it admonished all voters to turn out for the vote the next day on the proposition to build new ward school buildings. The bond issue passed by a margin of 2-1. Many more men voted than did women, but the women polled more votes in favor of the proposition. And in 1917 and 1918, 4 schools were built in Iowa City as replacements for the antiquated ward schools from 1858. This may be news to some of you about that this school existed. First of the 4 to open was the Kellogg School in 1917. When names for the school were suggested, no one could agree on one. So the president of the school board suggested the name of Clara Kellogg, and it was adopted. When the school was named, Kellogg was one of the most famous operatic soprano singers born in America. She had a repertoire of 45 operas in English, French, and Italian. The Kellogg School was across Newton Road from University Hospitals, occupying land upon which the VA hospital was built in the 1950s. In June of 1925, Iowa City voters approved the sale of the Kellogg School property to the University of Iowa. And in late 1947, the Veterans Administration purchased about 13 acres from which to build a hospital that would utilize the services of University of Iowa medical staff. While a replacement for the Kellogg School was being completed in Manville Heights in September of 1926, its soon-to-be students attended classes in the Kellogg building. The cornerstone of the Saban Elementary School was laid on October 3rd, 1917. It was also called the First Ward School. The emphasis on First Ward School. Henry Saban was an Iowa educator who served twice as the state superintendent of public instruction in the late 1800s. An elementary school in Clinton, Iowa was also named for him. Sadly, Saban School at 509 South Dubuque Street was demolished in 2015. Mann Elementary School at 521 North Dodge Street had its cornerstone laid a little earlier on August 26, 1917, and opened in 1918. It was known at that time as the new Third Ward School. Horace Mann was an American educational reformer who promoted public education. Among other things, he served as a United States representative for Massachusetts. He was acknowledged as one of America's foremost educators. The Longfellow School at 1130 Seymour Avenue had its cornerstone laid on July 18, 1917. At first, it was also referred to as the Fourth Ward School. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was an American poet and educator. He also served as a professor at Bowdoin and Harvard colleges. He was the most popular poet of his day. Recently, both the Mann and the Longfellow schools underwent complete renovations and each gained an addition. Now we move to the 1920s school. When the Lincoln Elementary School at 300 Teeters Court opened on October 4th, 1926, that's in Manville Heights, it served as a replacement for the Kellogg School, which was closed the year before. It goes without saying that it was named for President Abraham Lincoln. In 1924, the subdivision of University Heights was founded by the Kosair brothers. It did not become a separate city, however, until 11 years later. Many of its children attended the University Elementary School, and perhaps some went to Kellogg. Now we move to a school from the 1930s. In addition to the formation of University Heights, other growth took place on the west side of Iowa City. As a result, an elementary school was established on Benton Street. Roosevelt Elementary School, you'll never see this view from the road. It faces to the east. Opened in January of 1932. And before its completion, it was referred to as the Latha School until August of 1931, when the Roosevelt name was selected. It was named for President Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, immortalized as one of the four figures on Mount Rushmore, also had a career as a naturalist, rough rider in the Spanish-American War, noted safari goer in Africa, writer, and so forth. Henry Latha, who lived from 1819 to 1902, was the editor of an Iowa City newspaper. He came to Iowa City in 1847. He was a lawyer, the second mayor of Iowa City. He taught school and operated the Lathrop Tuition School for 7 years. This school was one of the early private schools in Iowa City. In addition, Lathrop was a farmer, livestock raiser, horticulturist, businessman, a county superintendent, University of Iowa regent, and one of the organizers of the Johnson County Old Settlers Association, a real Renaissance man. Not long ago, it was determined that renovations needed at Roosevelt would cost $5 million, and a decision was made to close the school. However, the building does exist today, and it became the Iowa City Community School District Education Center. Now we're going to jump 2 decades before the next schools were founded in the 1950s. Between 1930 and 1950, in that 20-year span, the population of Iowa City nearly doubled, giving rise to the need for more elementary schools. 2 new such schools were opened in 1954, Hoover and Twain. The Iowa City Board of Education felt that names with national prominence would be most suitable, and that entity chose the names. Irving Weber was a board member at the time, and it was he who suggested the name of Mark Twain. In 1953, the Bel Air edition began in the area just north of City High School. I first moved to Iowa City in 1979, and lived in Bel Air, and it had quite a different appearance at that time. It's interesting to see the scarcity of trees, and most often this occurred in additions because they were created from farmland. East Iowa City was created as a separate town. You can see it here, apart from Iowa City, or perhaps a rural subdivision with its own name. Willard, Maine bought the property and established a large jewelry factory where Chaddock Green now exists. It burned down in 1937. This set the stage for a great many new homes. East Iowa City got a rather slow start, but a big growth spurt came about 50 years later. I traced the decades when homes were built in East Iowa City and found that the decade of the 1950s witnessed by far the most, as we can see by this graph. It has tiny numbers, which I realize you cannot read. The northwest corner of First Avenue and Court Street was chosen for one of the new schools, to be named Herbert Hoover Elementary. 1955 was the all-time record year for home building in Iowa City up to that time. During 1955, there were a total of 289 permits for new homes issued. The prior year of 1954 was also a record year. Hoover Elementary School at 2200 East Court Street was named for President Herbert Hoover, a native of West Branch. When Hoover School opened in September of 1954, President Hoover was there for the dedication ceremonies. Recently, Hoover became the temporary home for the Tate High School, while its building on Mall Drive was undergoing renovation. In the 1950s, the area north of Highway 6 and east and west of Keokuk Street also underwent development. Students in this area attended the Longfellow School until the Mark Twain School opened. Here is Twain Elementary School, which opened in September of 1954, located at 1355 DeForest Avenue. J.P. DeForest was the first mayor of Iowa City. In his early days as Samuel Langhorne Clemens, Mark Twain lived in Iowa, and in January of 1969, he lectured at Metropolitan Hall in downtown Iowa City, a building that burned down in 1912 and was replaced by the Jefferson Hotel. In 1956, the large Courthill addition, some of you may know the name, was platted with over 130 lots. It's the area that's south of Court Street and east of First Avenue. So that would be where Our Redeemer Lutheran Church is on the corner. This area of expansion and others nearby led to the need for another elementary school in the far eastern section of town. This is a 1960 map of Iowa City, showing a much smaller area than exists today. If we zero in on it a little, we can see that there is no development west or south of University Heights, if you look over here on the left by the airport. On the east side of town, we see very little development south of Highway 6, and just the start of growth east of First Avenue, represented by the Courthill addition I just mentioned. That would be, well, that's actually up here. No, here, right here. In 1960, Robert Lucas Elementary School was planned for. It opened a couple years later, in the fall of 1962. It's located at 830 South Lawn Avenue. Lucas was a governor of Ohio and later the governor of the Iowa Territory from 1838 to 1841. His home was Plum Grove, where he died in 1853. East and West Lucas Townships and Lucas Street are named for him. Friendly Avenue is named for his wife. In 1969 through 70, a big expansion in the numbers of elementary schools took place with the building of 4 schools: Grant Wood, Ernest Horn, Bohumil Shimmick, and Helen Lemmy. What was the rationale for this? Well, the decade of the 1960s witnessed a growth of the Iowa City population by some 13,000 people, which represented an increase of almost 40%. In 1965, Wilbert Franz developed the Hollywood Manor addition on the east side of town, south of Highway 6, then called the Bypass. His streets were named primarily for movie stars. And 4 years later, a new school, Grant Wood, was built nearby. Grant Wood Elementary honored the noted artist, painter of the famous American Gothic portrait. Wood lived the last years of his life in his house on East Court Street in a home built by early brickmaker Nicholas Oakes in 1858. The Wood School at 1930 Lakeside Drive opened in the fall of 1969. Also in the 1960s, Ed Thomas developed the area on the southwest side of Iowa City in the area between Highway 1 and Highway 218. He called it the Bryn Mawr Heights Edition and named its streets after his Welsh ancestry. Not long after, there was impetus to build another elementary school to complement the nearby but farther east Roosevelt Elementary. The Ernest Horn Elementary School at 600 Kosair Avenue, it's in University Heights, by the way, opened in the fall of 1969, right on the border of Iowa City. Dr. Horn was a nationally known educator who was assigned with the task of establishing the university elementary and high schools in 1915. In the fall of 1970, the Shimmick Elementary School at 1400 Griesel Place opened. I've been told it's pronounced Griesel. It's spelled Grissel. Of Bohemian parentage, Bohumil Shimmick was a noted botanist at the University of Iowa, even though he received his degree in civil engineering from the University of Iowa in 1883. Remember, I mentioned that his name was attached to the North Elementary School, and the Shimmick State Forest in southeast Iowa is also named for him. Sometime in the 1960s, a large development called the Oakwoods Addition was created in the northeast section of Iowa City. Its streets are named mostly for colleges or universities. And along with the Oakwoods Addition, further growth in the area north and south of East Washington Street was taking place. Another elementary school was needed, and a site was chosen on East Washington Street. The Helen Lemmy Elementary School at 3100 East Washington Street opened in August of 1970. Lemmy was a local civil rights activist and community leader. She was born in Grinnell, Iowa. She graduated from the University of Iowa and went on to teaching positions in South Carolina and Alabama. In the early 1930s, she returned to Iowa City where she raised a family. The Lemmys used their home to provide room and board to African American students at the University of Iowa because they were not allowed to live in dormitories until 1946. Sadly, Helen died from smoke inhalation in a fire at her home in December of 1968. Now we get into 1990s schools. In the period of 1987 to 1991, the southwest area of Iowa City underwent development. In 1987, Southwest Estates was established west of Highway 218. Its street names derive from the names of cities in the American Southwest. A little north of that addition, and I think a little bit to the east, Mace Braverman developed an area he called Walnut Ridge, using the names of trees for his streets. In Iowa City, developers normally select the names for new streets with approval by the fire department and city council. Dave Cahill developed another nearby area named Galway Hills. All of this growth in southwest Iowa City necessitated the building of yet another elementary school. In the fall of 1994, the Irving Weber Elementary School opened at 3850 Road. I'd like to give a shout out to the Rarets. They were early Bavarian immigrants in Iowa City. Notably, their family had members who worked on the construction of the old Capitol. Also, Raret's sons were hired by Mr. Dillon to plow his 100-mile furrow between Dubuque and Iowa City to mark the route for the builders of the National or Military Road, now Highway 1. Irving Weber has been given the name of Iowa City's official historian, in part because of the plethora of articles concerning our local history that he had printed in the Iowa City Press Citizen. He published 8 volumes of his collected works under the title of Irving Weber's Iowa City. He was the first athlete at the University of Iowa to make the All-American swimming team. For years, he rang the bell at the opening of university swim meets. He became an owner of the Sidwell Ice Cream Company in Iowa City, and he later formed the Quality Check Dairy Association. The bronze statue that we see on Iowa Avenue that depicts him was donated by 2 individuals. The Archibald A. Alexander Elementary School opened in August of 2015 to serve students in the far southeast area of Iowa City. It's located at 3571 Sycamore Street on the edge of town. So who was Archie Alexander? Archie Alfonso Alexander broke through 2 deeply entrenched barriers as a young African-American man. He was one of the first African-Americans to play football at the University of Iowa and was the first African-American to earn a degree in civil engineering from the UI in 1912. He began his own company in 1919, and with his partners, he built freeways, apartments, airfields, sewage systems, power plants, and trestles. He co-designed the Tuskegee Airfield and the UI Central Heating Plant, its power plant, and a major steam tunnel beneath the Iowa River. In 1954, President Eisenhower appointed Alexander as governor of the United States Virgin Islands. Iowa City's newest school, Herbert Hoover Elementary, at 1355 Barrington Road, opened in 2017. After the decision was made to close the original Hoover School on Court Street, Hoover's name was retained with this new school. This map shows that the 12 Iowa City elementary schools are evenly spaced out. In addition, the new Borlaug Elementary School is shown in black up here on the far upper left. It lies in Coralville, but on the edge of Iowa City. I imagine kids who reside in the Walnut Ridge area attend that school. And Walnut Ridge is right below here. In summary, I've tried to present the history of elementary education in Iowa City, mainly by describing the schools past and present. I explained that when Iowa City was founded, there were no elementary schools and later only private schools. With the incorporation of the city, the first public schools were built, the ward schools. I've tried to show how the growth of Iowa City led to the need for additional schools, and I wanted to give you some biographical information about the individuals for whom the schools were named.